Welcome to the webinar on taking action on plastics pollution. It's a great pleasure on behalf of SAPEA and Academia Europaea to welcome you to this webinar, which I hope will be very interesting for everyone. Before we get on to the theme, let me say a few words about SAPEA and Academia Europaea. SAPEA stands for Scientific Advice by European Academies and is part of the European Commission's Scientific Advice Mechanism, which provides independent science advice to European Commissioners to inform their decision-making. SAPEA is made up of 5 pan-European organizations, in addition to Academia Europaea. There is ALEA, All European Academies, Eurocase, the Federation of European Engineering Academies, European Academies Science Advisory Council, ESAC, and FEAM, the Federation of European Academies of Medicine. Each of these organizations have led various evidence review reports, and here on the screen you see on the top 3 examples of evidence review reports produced by SAPEA and led by Academia Europaea's Cardiff Knowledge Hub. SAPEA got started in 2016, and the first meeting actually of the Grobert Chief Scientific Advisors with the SAPEA board and with the then Commissioner for Research and Innovation, Carlos Moedas, took place just a bit more than 4 years ago in Brussels. I have highlighted on the screen the title MAE, which means Member of Academia Europaea, just to indicate the importance of the European Academy in the scientific advice mechanism, both in the Group of Chief Scientific Advisors and in the SAPEA board. So the scientific advice mechanism operates in the following way. There's a policy challenge. The European Commission decides that it needs advice and turns to the Group of Chief Scientific Advisors. And if the Group of Chief Scientific Advisors thinks this is a task that can be dealt with, they ask SAPEA, Science Advice for Policy by European Academies, to provide an evidence review report. And at the bottom you see the process. The SAPEA board will decide that one of the 5 networks will lead. So in the case that we are dealing with here, it was Academia Europaea, that was the lead academy. A working group is established. There is a thorough review of the scientific literature and the scientific evidence. There's consultation with the scientific community, and after many working group meetings, finally a substantial evidence review report emerges. Throughout this process, there is links with the Group of Chief Scientific Advisors mediated by the Scientific Advice Mechanism unit in Brussels, so that the Group of Chief Scientific Advisors is aware all the time of the development of the evidence review report. When that is ready, then the Group of Chief Scientific Advisors are also ready to develop their scientific advice. They have stakeholder meetings, and ultimately we end up with 2 reports, which both are importantly in the public domain. So here you see to the left the evidence review reports front page, and to the right the scientific opinions front page. And then evidence is available, advice is available, and the Commission then has these documents available that will inform their policy making. So today we will be discussing the taking action on plastics, and we have 4 main speakers, which are listed here in the center of the slides. We have Nicole Grobert, who is the current chair of the European Commission's Group of Chief Scientific Advisors. We have Silvia Forni, policy officer from the European Commission's Directorate-General for Environment. And we have 2 members of the working group, of the SAPEA working group, namely Richard Thompson and Miriam Weber. We also have as a discussion Michael Sanders from the ETH, who also was a member of the working group. Esther Kentin from Leiden University will be leading the discussion following the presentations. And I am Ole Petersen, and it is my privilege to have given you this introduction and to chair this webinar. So if you want to ask questions, then please use the Q&A button on your screen. And please be concise. It's very difficult for the discussion leader to pick questions if there is a very long essay. So please be very concise and ask precise questions. The webinar is being recorded. So the program is now, my introduction is finished, and then we will move on to presentations from the working group, the key messages from the evidence review report. And after that, Nicole Grobert will talk about the policy recommendations from the scientific opinion, and Silvia Forni from the Commission will talk about the next steps for policy, and then we move into the discussion period. So now, without any further ado, I will call on Miriam Weber, one of the working group members, to give the first presentation. So the floor is yours, Miriam.
Thank you very much, Ole. Hello, everyone. My name is Miriam Weber. I'm a marine biologist and working on biodegradable polymers in the open environment since 12 years. On behalf of the working group, I'd like to welcome you on this webinar and thank you for your interest. We have worked on the evidence review report jointly, but of course, today replies cannot be coordinated with the group. However, the task was to set out the boundary conditions in which cases biodegradable plastics help to reduce plastic pollution in the open environment, such as soil, freshwater, and marine ecosystems. Now I'd like to share some slides. After all possible measures are taken to reduce or prevent further release of plastic into the open environment, biodegradable plastics may offer a solution for pollution in the environment. For example, when it is intentionally used and to remain, like you see on the left picture. Or if there is a high potential of loss, like for example, this lobster cage. Or if loss is intrinsic to use, which means that you use an object and while using it, you lose part of it. Every one of us loses 100 grams of their shoe soles every year. So we have urgent needs to find solutions for such applications, because while we speak here, input to the environment is ongoing and accumulation is ongoing. So the SAPEA working group came to the conclusion that main aspects should apply. Biodegradability has to be proven by measuring end products of the conversion of the plastic by microbes, namely carbon dioxide and or methane, usually done in closed vessels. However, to understand how long it really takes out in the real world, we see biodegradation as a system property. In short, it really depends very dense. For an evaluation, we need to know, is it biodegradable? We do that as explained before. Which conditions will this product be encountered to? And how is the biodegradation rate? For example, in the tropics, it will be probably faster than in a temperate region. So we need to know how these degradation rates in the corresponding conditions are. And for sure, we need to know the effects. The evaluation needs to remain, however, applicable, and an application by application approach seems reasonable. So said this, I'd like to give the floor to my colleague, Richard.
Hello, well, good afternoon, everybody. And the report also covers, of course, potential applications of biodegradable plastics. The first thing I want to mention there is to emphasize that the whole of the report is focused on biodegradability in the open environment. We don't consider in this report biodegradability in commercial composting settings, for example. And one of the key things when we think about applications is to consider where biodegradables might bring benefit in that setting, in the open environment. I think the first consideration has to be really to set biodegradables into context as part of the waste hierarchy. So, you know, in terms of thinking about an individual product, if there's possibility to reduce the use of that product, or to design for reuse, or to design for recyclability, then those priorities are likely to come above designing for degradability. It's also very clear from the report that we don't see biodegradability in the open environment as any solution to the problem of littering. Putting it another way, we shouldn't be designing plastic products on the assumption that they will carelessly, through careless behavior, end up in the environment. We need to, first of all, consider, as I've emphasized, strategies to reduce, reuse and recycle, and to re-educate to make sure that we don't get litter. And actually there's a conflict that it's important to recognize, that some parts of the waste hierarchy, particularly if we think about reuse and recycle, are looking more towards durability of polymer types rather than to their degradability. And so there are conflicts to some extent between reduce, reuse and recycle and the option of biodegradability. So in short, to get the benefits there, it's essential that we set biodegradable applications into a context of a waste hierarchy. Where we start to see benefits in the report, and we give some examples, is particularly where the nature of the use of the product means that at the end of the product's lifetime, it's almost impossible to separate it from the natural environment, to recover it back from the natural environment. Miriam in her slide gave an example of thin fleece films in agriculture, or lobster pots of some kind of traps in a fishery, where it might be very difficult to remove. And that's where we start to see benefits, more than, let's say, in littering reduction. In order to realize those benefits, it's absolutely essential that we consider biodegradability as part of the system property that Miriam outlined, that we consider not just the properties of the plastic, but the environment in which we expect that plastic to perform in terms of its degradability. And therefore, to realize the benefits that biodegradables may be able to bring, it's going to be absolutely crucial that we have appropriate testing and appropriate standards, and that we then label biodegradable products appropriately so that the user can understand the appropriate use and the appropriate disposal pathway. And it's only if we do that that we will see benefits rather than unintended consequences that could arise if biodegradable plastics are not used properly. Thank you.
Thank you very much to both Miriam and Richard for these very concise presentations. And I'm now very happy to invite Nicole Grobert, the chair of the Grobert Scientific Advisors to the Commission, to talk about the scientific opinion. So the floor is yours, Nicole.
Can you see and hear me? Okay. Hello, welcome everybody. It's wonderful to see so many names on the attendees list. Of course, wouldn't it be nice if we all sat in the same room and could see each other face to face? But here we go. So I'm the chair of the Group of Chief Scientific Advisors. I've taken on this role in November 2020, and I was also the lead on the scientific opinion on the biodegradability of plastics in the open environment. Just to give you a little bit more background following to what Ole said earlier, this is the group as of November 2020 who has been dealing with the science advice based on the scientific evidence produced by SAPEA. As you can see, I think the biggest news to pick up here is we're a diverse group of people with different academic backgrounds that complement each other, and we're not necessarily experts in a given field for which we're preparing an opinion. Now, this opinion on the biodegradability of plastics is sort of more or less a follow-up on previous work that we did where also SAPEA produced evidence reports. It started all with food from the oceans, where it became apparent that actually microplastic pollution is literally everywhere. It's also particularly found in the oceans. And based on these findings, the group of chief scientific advisors concluded that it was timely and proposed a scientific opinion on microplastic pollution. After this was published, the Commission and the Commission became aware of it. We got a request or a mandate from DG Environment to look specifically in the biodegradability of plastics in the open environment. And now directly to what Ole was already explaining, perhaps a little bit more in detail. So we received the mandate from DG Environment, and what then typically happens is that we run an expert workshop which looks at the scoping question and ultimately comes up with a definition of the scoping paper. And for this particular scientific opinion, and the scoping question on the biodegradability of plastics was from a scientific point of view and an end-of-life perspective, and applying to plastics that biodegrade either in the terrestrial, riverine, or marine environments, and considering the waste hierarchy and circular economy approach, the question then was, what are the criteria and corresponding applications of such plastics that are beneficial to the environment compared with non-biodegradable plastics? And this scoping question is our guideline. This is what we look for when we formulate the scientific opinion. And as you've seen in the presentations by Miriam and Richard, we've taken that scientific evidence and came up with some conclusions and recommendations. Rather than specifically giving you the fine details of the recommendations, I'd just like to give you the key message that we came up with and on which we base the recommendations. So first and foremost, and it was also mentioned before, we need to adopt a definition whereby the biodegradability is actually a systems property. And what does that mean? A systems property takes into account the material properties in itself, but also applies those properties in a specific environment. The example I'd like to give you here is, for example, a typical lunchbox. If you keep your lunchbox out on the kitchen counter, it's unlikely that you're keen to eat it the following day. However, if you were to store it in your fridge, I don't think many of us would shy away to eat that lunchbox with appetite the following day, or even if you were to keep it in the freezer after a month or longer. So this is what I mean by environmental conditions and how these can affect the system, the properties of a material. Now, in short, we came up with 3 recommendations. So first and foremost, the biggest mantra is to reduce, and to recycle. But also we need to test and certify to really understand what these biodegradable materials are and how they behave in specific environments. And then, of course, the user is a key factor. So users need to be informed. This can be done through labeling or information campaigns. But apart from the end user in terms of you, myself, my grandmother and family, there's also industry, and industry deals with other industry. So information transfer through the supply chains must be as clear and easily accessible. And that's the end of my presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Nicole, for that presentation. And we should now move on to Silvia Forni, but I'm not clear about whether she is actually here. I don't see her on my screen. Is Silvia Forni here?
Ollie, sorry, unfortunately, Silvia's just phoned me, and she's had some difficulty accessing the webinar this afternoon, so we're trying to get her connected, but she's unfortunately not here at the moment.
Okay, in that case, I think we will have to move on to the discussion time now. So I'm happy to give the floor to Esther Kentin, who, as I mentioned before, will be leading the discussion. So you are in charge now, Esther.
Thank you for giving me the floor, and welcome everybody. We just listened to the presentations, and some of you already sent in a question for our panelists. And I want to start with a question from Sabiri Chaudhary from the Wall Street Journal. And he, the question is there a recent push relates to the developments on the market? The question is the recent push by big consumer goods companies like Nestle and Bacardi to use PHAs to make bottles of other products an effort that will help to address plastic pollution? Specified, is there enough evidence, for example, that such as materials as PHAs are in fact marine biodegradable and also degradable in landfills, as companies say? Are the certifications that are now used, developed by TÜV Austria, and which are based on lab tests, not a test in the open environment, enough for the material to be used in real life? So I give the question to you, Miriam Weber, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the 3 questions, in fact. And we think for the first one, is there a possibility that bottles and other products are an effort and will help plastic pollution? We think no. There are different aspects, or actually 2 aspects to consider. These products cannot be solving the problem of littering, as Richard already mentioned. This has to be solved by other means. Another aspect which is interesting here to look at is that if a product is littered or coming to the environment and is biodegradable there, it helps reducing accumulation at some point of time, at least a little bit. But we should not focus on these products to overcome the big problem to improve waste management and solving this problem of littering by other means. Then there was the second question about, is there enough evidence showing PHAs are in fact marine biodegradable or degradable in landfills? We have to have also 2 aspects here. We look at raw materials, where we have quite good evidence, but keep in mind that there are around about 90 or over 90 different PHAs. So we really have to know about which ones we are talking about. But in general, we can say that these are among the best biodegradable polymers out there. And when we are talking about raw materials, we are not looking at products. Products are blends, and we need to know how they behave and do testing on products rather than on raw materials in the context we are talking today. And nevertheless, then also assess the effects of these products. Okay, last but not least is the third question, is about certification from TÜV Austria. OK Marine is the label which you can get if you pass this standard specification put out by TÜV Austria. It's a seawater test. So as a marine scientist, I will then say, whoa, it's, the marine environment is not only about seawater, and since most of the products sink to the seafloor, we should then also consider other conditions having in these certification schemes. So I would propose to adopt OK Marine to OK Marine water column, for example, or to include more testing in different environments and conditions. And lab test is for proving biodegradability and is not assessing the range of biodegradation rates out in the real world. So I would also consider to add this on to the certification scheme in this case. So we have a sound evaluation scheme for risk assessment.
Thank you, Miriam. I see also Richard nodding. Do you have something to add on that?
Well, very simply to say, I don't think we should be designing products with the environment as being the receiving place for our wastes. You know, we need to think about reduce, reuse, recycle. We need to think about capturing products and reducing the rate of flow of litter to the environment. We shouldn't see degradability as some magic solution to the challenge of littering. But that's not to say degradability of plastics doesn't have an answer. but it's not center stage in terms of everyday bottles becoming litter.
Thank you. But it seems that the most of the developments what we read about in the media is regarding these kind of products, that we replace the plastics that we litter actually by biodegradable. But later on, maybe on that a little bit more. There is another question came in from Mario Malachonico. Maybe I pronounce it not correctly. When you say reduce, do you also mean to redesign in order to minimize the amounts of plastic needed to perform the same level of protection? Or do you just mean to substitute plastics with other materials? Is there anyone who... Yeah, please, Richard.
I don't think there's a single answer to any of these things, but it's not a question of trying to substitute plastics for other materials in all applications. Certainly not. Plastics bring immense societal benefit. Yes, it is a case of not using plastic where it's unnecessary. And, you know, if I give an example of that, I think of a free toy that might be given away with a hamburger without the consumer asking for it in the first place. So there is a role for reducing the use of plastics. And that could also be, in some applications, in the quantity of plastic that's used. You can think of the sometimes considered excessive wrappings around some kinds of gifts where more plastic is perhaps used than is necessary to do the job. But equally, there becomes a point where you reach diminishing returns, where actually designing for end-of-life recyclability may require a certain amount of plastic component and a certain types of constituents to make it valuable in a circular economy. So it's about matching those things together, I think, rather than thinking there's a single answer. But of course, we have to think, first of all, about strategies to reduce if the plastic is not needed in the first place.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I was just thinking about balloons, for example, as a kid's toy that you get often, and, you know, it's often found in the environment, but would be a great opportunity to keep such a nice product on the one hand. But anyway, I see now also Sylvie Forni is present in our team. I'm just looking at Ole. Should I give back the floor to give you the opportunity to give her presentation?
Yes, I think we should have Silvia's presentation, but it might be better to let the discussion run for a little while, because Silvia's title was Next Steps, and perhaps this could come in sort of towards the end as a kind of nice conclusion of this webinar, now that we have the pleasure of your company, Silvia. So I suggest, Esther, we keep the discussion going for a bit more, and then at an appropriate point we will call on Silvia to give her 5-minute presentation. Also, please bear in mind, Esther, we do have Michael Sander, another working group member, present here, and
Definitely.
Michael may also want to comment on some of the questions.
Definitely. I have now a question for Nicole Grobert. There's a question of Asania Troiani about giving examples to understand on how to understand biodegradability as a system property. Could you reflect a little bit more on that?
So if you remember the lunchbox example I gave you, biodegradability of a material, let's say a banana or any other product that we know readily biodegrades if you leave it out maybe on your lunchtime table. After a few days, it becomes, less palatable, and eventually it sort of dissociates itself. If you, however, keep that banana or your lunchbox under cold conditions, such as in the freezer, then the biodegradation process is very slow, and you find that the banana, or in fact maybe Ötzi, is still around after many, many thousands of years. So what it means is that a particular material behaves in different ways in different environments, and the properties is then defined by the environment or environmental factors. So you cannot say that something is always biodegradable. It depends on where the object is.
Correct. So we could maybe compare it to, well, you compare it to the lunchbox, but we also have these labelings: best before, if refrigerated at a certain temperature, or we have the labels indeed, if you freeze it will be much longer. I see also a question.
I think Michael Santa wanted to come in here, Esther. Sorry.
I'm sorry, I didn't see it.
Maybe,
sorry, Michael.
Yeah, hello from my side. You can hear me well?
Yes.
Yeah. I just give you a natural occurring material where you can see that this is not only fixed to plastics. From your name, I assume maybe you're from Italy. I don't know. Venice is built on wood, and wood is biodegradable. Yet in anoxic systems like the sediments below Venice, it doesn't biodegrade because it needs oxygen to biodegrade. And this is a perfect example, I think, that shows not only for plastics is this true, but also for biopolymers, that the environment and the conditions in the environment define to which extent and how fast these materials biodegrade. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I want to continue with a question from Maja Paul. It's a challenge to pronounce the names. Polyacalio. The question is, the Silvia report recognizes the importance of materials residence time in nature as one aspect of environmental risk assessment analysis. The risk associated with something that lasts 1 to 5 years in the environment versus the same thing that lasts plus 500 years are likely to be different. Related to this, the report gives 2 interesting suggestions below: the creation of a catalogue of residence times of conventional and biodegradable plastics in open environments as a baseline for comparative risk assessment, and 2, the development of degradation rate categories as a minimum, a fast and slower category to account for different lifetimes of a product. So now the question comes, are there already plans for these? How are these suggestions can be carried forward? I think that's also a matter of policy. So I would like to invite Silvia Forni to answer that.
Yeah. Good afternoon. Sorry for joining so late. It took a very long time, so
we're glad you're here.
The first part, I think I missed the first 30 minutes. So, and could you please repeat your question, Esther? From
well, this was about it was about the results and the outcome of the report, that the creation of catalogue of resident times for plastics could be developed, and next to that, the development of degradation rate categories. So how is the Commission, how is how can we move forward within policies? Because we see all kinds of developments, such as already mentioned with the plastic bottles of Nestlé and other companies. But
so there is indeed a recommendation in the opinion concerning a catalogue of materials providing for biodegradation rates according to the different environments. We see this as a positive input to the discussion. We know that biodegradation is an issue of materials and of environments, and this is what you mentioned probably earlier in the discussion when you mentioned biodegradability as a system property. So we know that we have to look at materials and environments. It's a very good idea to have this catalogue listing materials. We will see, because we are in the process of getting input, and the opinion is certainly extremely valuable inputs, and the recommendation on catalogue as well. So we will see how to translate this recommendation into something at level of policy. We will see, but certainly it is something we see in a positive way. And I know that it comes also from some producers. We have already received some requests in this sense. So it's clearly something which is attracting attention and for which there is appetite.
Thank you. I move forward to Miriam, who is also waving, and then Nicole.
I think that this could be also a joint effort from industry and scientists and governmental institutions. So like a joint effort in bringing every possibility to move forward fast, because these kind of data are difficult and long lasting to assess. That would be good to make fast progress. Thank you.
And then Nicole.
I mean, the concept is a strong concept, but what one has to bear in mind that it's not an easy goal to achieve, given that you have to maintain certain standards or you have to reach certain standards. It has to be a standardized approach, so the data becomes comparable and objective, and also the maintenance of such data bank or what was it called? Catalog. Yeah, the maintenance of such catalog has to be done very carefully, because sometimes data gets out of date. It's superseded by new findings, and we have to make sure that we don't look up old data that is irrelevant or maybe has become, like I said, superseded by new findings. So it's not an easy exercise. I'm quite looking forward to what the Commission is going to come up with if they like that concept.
I see also Richard. Do you want to add something?
No, I mean, you say it's a complicated task, and I think we must consider this first of all in terms of the benefits that the application might bring and the context in which it might bring. You know, what is the environment, the receiving environment at the end of life likely to be? Where is it likely to be? And we need to make sure that if we're considering degradability as a solution, that the properties of degradability will deliver across that range of environments. And that's why it's so challenging to design a lemonade bottle that would degrade everywhere from the Arctic right through to the tropics, and yet at the same time hold the fizzy lemonade while you want it to. You know, so it's about matching those things. And I think that the aspiration of the catalogue is good, but it could be quite complex to put together.
Thank you. Is there also a room for ECHA in this process? Or we know, of course, that the REACH is regulating substances that could be, well, not at this moment registration of polymers, but nevertheless regulated as seen by the restriction proposal on microplastics. Do you see a role for chemists and the chemistry industry, but also ECHA for regulating? I see Richard?
Well, I would see compatibility there. Yeah, with REACH. Yeah, I think there's certainly alignment that could be achieved.
Then we move on to the next question. Let me check. I have a question of Maya Poicalio. The SAPIA report is focused on biodegradation of polymers in the open environment. Is there another background study ongoing that tackles the issue of potential microplastics accumulation in the human body? That's a bit different maybe, but are you aware as a scientist of also, well, microplastics, but then maybe biodegradable microplastics in human body? Yes, Nicole?
Perhaps I can't give the answer that's expected, but I'm sure there is research out there. I'm not in the field, but I'm sure there's research out there. But we have to bear in mind that the SAPIA reports, as well as the opinions, they are very much focused around the scoping question, which I presented earlier. So it's a very defined area which we are addressing. And if human health is a particular aspect, we had a previous piece of work on microplastics where we looked at the impacts. SAPIA also wrote a very strong report, and I think, Richard, you were also part of that report. If you'd like to add or have anything to add. But it's very much defined by the scoping question. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to finish the document.
I mean, in terms of human health, of course, there's bound to be lots of interest in that topic, and there are bodies working on it worldwide. There's particular interest from a lot of NGO groups, and I guess to me, I ask the question because it's often more broadly couched as a catalyst to move change about the whole issue of plastics, and you know, the worry I have is that actually most of us are convinced that there is a problem of accumulation of plastics in the environment. This is to the side of just the biodegradables. So the question is, how do we fix that? You know, to what extent do we need to carry on spending, you know, scientific resources directed to science inquiry towards more evidence about the problem? To me, where we're lacking is about how to apply the different solutions. And that's where this topic of biodegradability, I think, is really important, because it's part of the solutions, but it's clear that maybe we don't fully understand exactly how and where to apply. And so, of course, I want to know about issues relating to human health, but I wouldn't necessarily invest money in that compared to investing money in solutions that will help to address the problem more broadly, because we're already aware there's a problem, and actually fixing the escape to the environment will also help to solve things with respect to challenges to human health that we might not yet know about.
Yes, Nicole. Thank you, Richard.
Going to give an answer before I have really thought about the answer, but one important factor is human behavior. So if we look at, I mean, the aspect of human health and accumulating plastics in the human body, or having it in fish that we then eat, or mussels is probably a better example, that produces a reaction in people. Everyone goes, ooh, I wouldn't want to eat something like that. But at the same time, you have human behavior in the sense that humans just drop plastic bags, or they litter. So there are different types of human behaviors and reactions that are actually extremely important in solving this whole problem. And like Richard said, I think we need to start before plastics or any other materials accumulate in the human body. We need to avoid it. And that includes training, educating, teaching people, or explaining to them what it means if they behave in one or the other way. And the mantra always applies. The mantra that I keep saying, and also Richard and Miriam and Michael, is to reduce, reuse, and recycle. Just be aware of the resources and be careful with our planet.
Thank you, Nicole. Then I would like to continue a little bit on the microplastics and take two questions in one. Regarding the use of biodegradable plastics for products where we cannot, where through tear and wear it might be unavoidable, such as from textiles and tires. But how does that then relate also regarding the toxicity of other materials and additives that are part of that maybe bioplastic material? Is that taken into account in the testing? Should that be taken into account? Okay. Yes, please, Miriam.
Yeah, I think this is very clear that it has to be taken into account. There is no way around that. We have to be sure that we are not doing the same mistake again.
Thank you. I think that was indeed also the question of Almut Reichel about the cigarette butts. Also not replacing. I'm moving a little bit forward. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, Michael.
I mean, maybe a quick comment from my side. There's, of course, a big debate about microplastics and problems associated with microplastics, and that's justified. What we should be careful about, I think, is that if we see biodegradables making microplastic, and if these materials are truly biodegrading, we should have a slightly different view in that that is a transition phase towards CO2 if the materials work. So the fact that we have so much microplastic is because this is a size fraction where conventional plastics stops to biodegrade. This does mean if biodegradables work in the given environment, we hopefully do not form microplastic, but transition through microplastic if it forms on the way. But the ultimate goal would be to have biodegradation to CO2. It's an important point to stress because we are well aware of the microplastic issue, and I'm sure we will have publications and already have that say biodegradables make microplastics, but one has to be careful to assess that in detail whether this is the final state or not. And in many cases it won't be, it will go beyond this. Thank you. Thank you.
I would like to move a little bit more on also on the policy side. I was wondering, does the report and the opinion from the scientists, advisors, support the REACH concept of no data, no market? So if you want to put on a biodegradable material on the market, should there be such a policy such as foreseen in REACH, that you first have to provide all the data and the chemistry safety sheets, etc., before you actually can put it on the market? And I would like to ask that to Silvia Forni.
Yeah, so this is, again, as we have already said, something could be a source of inspiration. So we see this as positive to look at materials. And in REACH, we know that we look at the substances, not polymers. So we could explore these. We see it as something positive, but still, we have to look at how we could do that. It's something, for further exploration. It's similar to what we have already discussed, I think. Catalog of materials. Here again, process for something similar to registration. I don't know, but yeah, there is some compatibility, as Richard also said. But again, we have to look at it. It's a recommendation, and we take it for something to be looked at.
Do I see you want the floor, Richard?
You can read my mind, Esther. I was thinking, I guess there's two steps to this really, and I think as a second step that goes beyond that is actually in using the words biodegradability, for example, and that's where we need to be sure that we have proper testing, that we shouldn't have those words like biodegradability used on a product unless it's properly supported by testing and standards. And that, as my understanding of it, I could put it back to Silvia, is that's not necessarily a case at the moment. The word that you could use the term biodegradability without necessarily having applied testing. Is there a policy requirement behind that? And so we need that, and that links back to the point about, Michael's point about, do the microplastics degrade as it's transition? And to Miriam, the question to Miriam about the toxicity. So I think there's a question here about all products, but there's also a question about the labeling of products to make sure that is accurate and appropriate, and that the consumer can understand it. And I think the final thing I'd say on that is I think it's absolutely critical as we move forward. If we want to work with the consumer and change their behavior, they have to understand what is communicated and what is meant reliably by a term like biodegradability. If they can't understand what it means because it's inconsistently applied, then we can't expect them to behave appropriately.
And if I may, maybe you mentioned additives in the minutes I missed, but this is also something I think should be taken into consideration, because we learned that additives may have an influence on the process of biodegradation, so we should not forget additives. When we talk about materials, etc., let's not forget additives.
Yes, but if you read the report also, for example, I'm referring to a scenario 3. We see a lot of testing and a lot of developments of standards and methods. But what we would do in the meantime? I mean, that could take years. So what would be the short-term implications of this report? Can I give the floor to Nicole?
the short-term implications is to reduce, reuse, recycle, I'd say. I think this is first and foremost number one. I'd just like to come back to this no data, no market. Yes, they're perhaps not strictly speaking chemicals, but on the other hand, with the materials chemistry background, to me, polymers are chemicals as well.
Yeah,
so,
me as well, but I'm not a chemist.
But I think the no data, no market is with regard to the highly toxic chemicals, from what I understand. But then I'm too sure. Miriam may have a more precise answer.
Please.
In terms of your question, what can we do in the meantime before reaching scenario 3? Starting with scenario 1, yeah. So we can already make some good progress there. And in the meantime, then also make an effort and bring a group of interdisciplinary expertises together, because this problem cannot be solved by chemists or by marine biologists, by material scientists. It has to be also involve the socioeconomics policy. So you see how interdisciplinary and complicated this is. It will take definitely some years, but we can start with simple and clear testing and very clear labeling, and make some good progress there now.
Yes, well, then I can have a nice follow-up question from Gaëlle Hout from Surf Riding Europe. That there are already applications identified in the study, and they are already going on. This is put on the market. For example, the agricultural milk foley, for example. So they may have benefits under certain conditions. So what measures should therefore be adopted to restrict the use of biodegradable plastics for the uses where they don't or not bring any benefit, or on the contrary, where we know they would add a problem? What kind of measures could we take? And then I would like to give the floor to Silvia.
So the issue of applications is of fundamental importance for us, and I had in my 3-minute presentation a point on this, because we are extremely grateful for this opinion and report, because it's really about conditions and usage scenarios in which biodegradable plastics may be beneficial. So this is for us a first preliminary consideration, which is of fundamental importance to us. Is a starting point. And here we have some examples. We have some examples in the opinion and in the report, and we will look at them, and we will see. But certainly, there is a message which is maybe the main message. That is, let's look at these possible applications, but for specific cases. So not for every type of plastics, but for some very specific applications. This is for us one of the main messages of the opinion and of the report. And it's a starting point for then the rest, labeling, of course, testing, of course, etc. But as a first point, we see that is important in the report and in the opinion is the point on which applications. So where it makes a sense to have these plastics instead of conventional plastics.
Please, Nicole.
Yeah, what Silvia just said follows up also the question on what is a system's property. So it's the material in an environment, in an application. I think the application is as important as the other factors or deciding factors. Is it making a difference in a specific application, in a specific environment? And if it's beneficial over conventional plastics, then it may be considered.
Well, I received a follow-up comment on that regarding the plastic bags directive, which is also including biodegradable bags. Is it therefore this report a moment also for reconsidering and revising this plastic bag directive on this specific biodegradability point. I'm looking at Silvia, sorry.
So, concerning single-use plastics?
No, it's, the follow-up was specifically on the plastic bags directive, where there is an exception also on biodegradable plastic bags.
Yeah, so we were waiting for this opinion, this authoritative opinion, before starting the work on the policy framework. We will get some other input in the next month. And this was also in my presentation because, so we have this input, then there will be some more targeted consultation, public consultation, so more will come in the next month. And we will certainly look again at possible applications. We see there are examples, we see that there are criteria, we see that there is an example which is the one of compostable bags where benefits are clear. We see that there are other examples like the carrier bags where the benefits are less clear. So we will continue this discussion. We have some time in front of us. We will use this time to talk to the plastic community, the stakeholders, in order to go into more details concerning applications. But we asked for criteria to identify such applications, and now we have some criteria to identify those applications. So we will continue along the same lines before getting to very specific applications, if any.
Sorry to break in. I just wonder, Silvia, you may already have gone into your presentation, but I wonder whether this might be a good place for you to sort of give a more rounded presentation of what you think are the next steps. Sorry to break in, but I just see time is moving on. And maybe if we are going to have the presentation from Silvia, we should do it now.
Yes, please.
So I would like to add 2 points because I think that many things have already been said. I would like to come back again on consumer behavior because this was one of my points. We think that this opinion and this report tell us that it's not only an issue of technology, but also of a consumer behavior. We, as regulators, we have to consider both. We have to ensure that the technology is there, that is properly defined, and that it works well under real environmental conditions. But we also have to ensure that consumer behavior does not annihilate the potential of such a technology, that it does not increase littering instead of decreasing it. So this is also a point of fundamental importance for us. And this is also the holistic approach Miriam was referring to in her earlier intervention. We have to look at these plastics in a holistic approach, and this means to look also at the consumer behavior. And sometimes we see that consumer behavior may complicate things. And this on the substance, on the procedure. So I said that there will be more stakeholder consultation in the next months. We will continue. We have some studies still running. We will come to an end where we will start preparing for a policy framework. The policy framework will aim at establishing some general principles, general rules applying to these plastics. And then we will in parallel, we will look at other files, like for instance, the revision of the Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive. So in parallel, and here it's our firm intention to ensure coherence, consistency between these two processes. So the policy framework on bio-based, biodegradable and compostable plastics that was announced in the new Circular Economy Action Plan, and the revision of the Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive, so consistency between the two processes. And then, of course, the Single-Use Plastic Directive, because there is an Article 15, which says that by 2027, we will have to assess the progress made concerning criteria or standards for biodegradability in the open environment. So we have some time in front of us to do all these things. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Silvia. Back to you, Esther.
Thank you. Well, we had also some more technical questions. One of Erwin Lepoudre from Green Planet project refers to the distinctions and the subcategories that are made in the report between natural occurring biopolymers, bio-derived polymers, and synthetic polymers. More specifically, the report makes use of the definition of a natural biopolymer as a polymer produced by a living organism. The question then is, would you classify polymers from microorganisms obtained through fermentation process with the same chemical structure as a polymer within a wild organism as being a natural occurring biopolymer? That's quite a technical question. So I'm looking at Miriam or Michael. Michael, can I invite you?
I could give it a try. It's not my area of expertise, so I take this with a grain of salt, and I certainly can claim to talk for the SAPEA group here. I think if it's a naturally made material, meaning made by microbes in fermentation processes, I would consider it a bioplastic. I would consider it bio-based. The answer is a bit hard to address. The question is a bit hard to address in that they may be chemically the same, yet there might be very big differences in the structure that they form, in the chain length, in the stereochemistry. So a lot of things actually matter when you go into the details. And so I don't feel comfortable giving a general answer. But I will say, if you use a fermentation process to make a biopolymer, I think this is a bio-based material. I think whether or not it's biodegradable, that's yet a different question, right? So we have to be careful not to mix the terms, but it could be a bio-based, biodegradable material.
Yes. Well, indeed, some legislation makes actually a distinction between natural chemical substances, right, being present in nature as natural, and those that aren't. So it could be a difference. I have another question from Fanny Rateau about the standards being developed by ISO on biodegradable plastic materials and testing methods. What would be your key recommendation for the development of these standards? That's a very open question, but and I can look to anyone.
I'll give it a start. I would recommend to give options that plastic products in the marine environment can end in different conditions, on the seafloor, on the beach, on the water surface, in the water column, and so on, and reflect these tests also regarding the organisms you choose. And the second recommendation is not to forget the ecosystem impact. So if you have a substantial amount of plastic in sand, for example, you will alter biogeochemical processes in there. So it would be nice to have that reflected at some point of time. Maybe Richard wants to add as a marine biologist.
No, not specifically on that.
Nicole?
It's a gut reaction rather than a well thought through answer again. But biodegradability is a very complex beast, and what we need to take sort of into consideration, it is not the answer to the plastic pollution problem. You have to be very careful in assessing all the boundary conditions in which these biodegradable plastics are used or intended to be used. And for standardization, I think what you need to look and what answers do we want from standardized protocols? wants to give us answers to specific questions or end user applications, and perhaps we need to look at the material's properties in the context of an end user application in which it is intended to be used, and then based on that define the standards that they need to fulfill. That would be my approach if I were the person to develop standards. I like Richard nodding.
Thank you, Nicole. Miriam?
I like to add one point, which I think, or we think is crucial, is also to look at the recovery time. That we know when the impact is over, so to say, and compare that also to all other plastic types. So we're not looking only on biodegradable ones, because the impact of general plastic is immense, and some will never stop.
Thank you. I have a question of Artemis Papadaki. Will the use and restriction of oxo-degradable plastics be re-examined in this frame of biodegradability as a system property? Well,
this is
Nicole?
one for Silvia. This is one for Silvia.
But what do you think yourself? Or maybe Richard? Should it be reconsidered? So degradable plastics?
Well, the framework that we're suggesting should be applied to all products that are wanting to call themselves biodegradable. I mean, if they pass the test, that's the proof of it. Is do they pass the criteria that have been very clearly defined by Miriam in terms of the system property? I mean, that's what we're looking at. I don't see this as a discussion about an individual, a particular brand. It's about having a system that will work and will safeguard us for the future, and that will avoid some of the mistakes that have occurred in the past.
Michael?
Yeah, but we need to be, I think we can go a bit more in detail on the OXO question. That is, OXOs are obviously an additive that require activation. And this is a fundamental difference, I would say, we need to point out to other materials that we consider to fall into the category of biodegradable materials. And that is that they carry the chemical structure for breakdown it's embedded in the chemistry of the backbone of the polymer. And this is not the case for polyolefins, for which OXO additives are made. And so the polyolefins do have the issue that they need some external activation. And then we are back at the system property. If you don't know where the plastic ends, as Miriam pointed out, or it depends where it ends, you may end up with a significant fraction in environments where this activation does not work. And then, of course, you have a big issue with all the materials that rely on that very specific activation. I can't speak for the group, but I would say, no, we don't have to reassess OXOs. I think this is a technology that there is very reasonable doubt or even concern that this is not what we should consider a biodegradable material. And I think the actions are justified.
And actually, this scenario should prevent that we make the same mistakes again with oxo-degradable plastics. Miriam?
And if you're talking about the open environment, it has to work without a pre-treatment. It's very simple. And it has to work on a product. That's it.
Thank you. Silvia?
Just wanted to recall that the action has been taken by the co-legislators. Oxo-degradable plastics have been banned in the Single-Use Plastics Directive. So on the available evidence, the decision has been taken by the co-legislators.
Thank you, Silvia, for this clarification. Nicole?
Just one comment I wanted to make earlier and I forgot, but it also fits into the discussion now. In the process of us preparing the scientific opinion, once we've produced a solid draft of recommendations, we also, of course, it's then reviewed by multiple experts, international experts in the field, but we also invite stakeholders to a stakeholder meeting to view those recommendations just before they're being submitted, to see whether these recommendations are also feasible for various stakeholders in the field. And it's not that they have influence on it, but if there's a recommendation that's totally non-viable, then we just need to think about what the meaning of a recommendation is. And I guess it applies to all the tricky questions that we're also discussing right now in terms of degradables, etc. But it's a quite a complete process that experiences quite a lot of scrutiny from various parties.
Thank you. I want to come with the last question. This is a question regarding, well, also plastic pollution in other parts of the world, but I want to actually link it to, well, what is happening here and how it will actually also involve other parts of the world, because most of the plastic is actually not produced in Europe, but in Asia and in the US or in North America. So what kind of effects should it also have on their innovations and policies? Is there any developments you know of, or standard setting in other, or cooperation in other parts of the world? Can I give the floor to Nicole as she nods?
And in fact, as part of the microplastic pollution opinion, we started to collaborate with the Chief Science Advisor, Dr. Mona Nemer. She's the Chief Science Advisor to Justin Trudeau in Canada. This collaboration was continued also in the biodegradable plastics, and we've held G7 roundtables, and also SAPEA had experts that were proposed by Dr. Mona Nemer. So there is, of course, engagement in the G7 countries. There is activity in the G20, and they're looking similarly. It's a global problem. It's not just a European problem or a national problem. So there's a lot happening. Details, I don't know all of them, but there's a lot happening.
Is there something you would like to add, Richard?
No, I think that covers it really pretty well, to say that it's a global problem. I mean, I of course, in the same way that biodegradability is context specific, and we've talked about the system properties and the differences in temperature, the solutions to the challenge of plastic pollution as a whole are going to be context dependent according to the customs and the practices and the infrastructure in different nations. There isn't a one size fits all solution to the problem, and it is going to depend on what's available locally.
I see Miriam, please.
Maybe Nicole first. You're referring to.
It was just immediately to that. It's a personal note, not necessarily with my GCSA hat on, but research in our laboratories is happening cross borders. So borders don't really exist in research, and I'm sure Miriam and Michael and Richard here, they have collaborations all across the world engaging with scientists there. So at that level, definitely the exchange is happening. What will be key is that we reach out to policymakers worldwide and push the boundaries there a bit more.
I think it would be also very important for industry to have this support on a global level, so you're not competing between countries or different boundary conditions. And international standard organizations can support this process.
Thank you. Then I would like to end this discussion. I will give the floor back to Ole Petersen. Thank you.
Well, it just falls to me to thank everybody for what I think has been a very exciting and very interactive discussion and some nice presentations. So on behalf of SAPEA and of Academia Europaea, I thank also not only the panelists, but certainly also the many people who have been attending and the many people who have sent in some very good and very exciting questions, which actually engendered a very, very good discussion. So thank you very much to everybody, and I close this webinar now. Thank you very much.